Good afternoon, everyone. Can y'all hear me okay? Well, very good. Well, welcome everyone to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name is Christopher Gwinn. I'm one of the rangers here. And as I say every weekend, it's a real pleasure to have you all for this installment of our winter lecture series. If you do have a cell phone or any other electronic device, I would ask you to shut that off just so it doesn't go off in the middle of the program. And then I would also remind you that if you are interested in rewatching any of the lectures or if you missed a lecture, all of these are being filmed by our good partners and friends at the Gettysburg Foundation, and they're all available on the Gettysburg Foundation's YouTube page. So if you want to catch this one in a few days, it should be up and available. And it's a great way to rewatch, and again, it's a great opportunity for us to reach audiences that maybe can't actually drive here on a cold winter's day like you all. I'm very excited that you're all here today because we do have a special program. There was a Park Service ranger named Tom Holbrook, who many of you may be familiar with. And we'll talk a little bit more about him at the end of the program. But every year for our winter lectures, Tom always did a program that he called If These Things Could Talk, where he would pick some museum objects. He'd bring them in here, as we did today, and he'd kind of do a deep dive into those pieces from the American Civil War, be it a musket, a bullet, or something in between, something else. And so to kind of continue that tradition, Tom retired. We're doing that again today. And it's not just going to be me. We have a great group of individuals who will be speaking today. Park Rangers Andrew Regiec, Matt Atkinson, Dan Welch, Gettysburg Foundation Curator Mike Kwolek, and myself. We're all going to pick out our own objects and do a little bit of a deep dive into what those things are and maybe what stories they have to tell. And I have the unfortunate job of going first. You may or may not believe this, but at the park, we get offered objects, relics, all the time. There'll be somebody cleaning out their grandfather's attic, and they'll find something related to the American Civil War, and they think, well, I wish I could find a place for this. And so they reach out to the Museum and Visitor Center here. And we actually have a group of staff called the Collections Acquisition Committee, where every couple months or so, we take a look at all the objects that the curator has kind of gathered, and we look at each one and we determine, should we add this to the collection? Should we buy it? Should we accept it? Just because we have way more, let me rephrase that, we have way less space than objects we'd like to have. And so the two objects that you see up on the screen here today, they were recently, I was saying last year, offered to the park. And as you can see, one's a cane. It's got a beautiful ivory top to it. And then the object on the left is a book. It's the Soldiers National Cemetery report that is created in 1864 after the creation of the Soldiers National Cemetery. Of course, the National Cemetery here that held the killed in action, at least the Union killed in action from the Battle of Gettysburg. And of course, that's the cemetery that Abraham Lincoln helps to dedicate with the Gettysburg Address. Now, ordinarily, we wouldn't accept a book like this. We have many of them. We wouldn't accept a cane either. We have many canes, a lot owned by Civil War veterans and Civil War officers. But these two objects in particular, they belong to an individual that's rather interesting. And there are a couple clues on both of these items that I want you to take a look at when you come up, because they offer a little clue as to the identity of this individual. He's this man in the center of the slide. Does anybody know who that is? I heard his name. William Saunders. Did you take? Oh, you don't count. You don't count. We have a resident battlefield volunteer and buff. His name is William Saunders. William Saunders, he's a fascinating individual. Fascinating individual. He's famous for a couple things. The most pertinent to the story of the Battle of Gettysburg is William Saunders is a landscape architect. And William Saunders is going to be the gentleman that designs the Soldiers National Cemetery. He's going to be the one that basically creates the layout plan for that national cemetery. He is a fascinating individual, as I mentioned. He's born in Scotland in the year 1822. As a young man, he becomes very interested in gardening. And so as a young student, he attends the University of Edinburgh, and he studies horticulture. And after his academic pursuits, he'd become a gardener. And when we say gardener, I think a lot of us picture, our grandmas out back tending the vegetable garden, or something we would do as a hobby. When William Saunders called himself a gardener, he was aspiring to something much more professional, I think, because he worked as a gardener at some of these grand estates in Scotland and England and Europe. These well-manicured English gardens, these sweeping palatial estates that some of those landowners would own. And there was a real both science and an art to it. Eventually, Saunders comes to the United States. This is in the late 1840s. He becomes a United States citizen in 1857. And during the middle of the American Civil War, 1862, the Department of Agriculture is established. That's actually during Lincoln's administration that is created as an agency. And Saunders, who's only 40 years old at the time, this is the best picture I could find. I think it's from his later life. He's only 40 at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's tapped for a role in this new Department of Agriculture. He is the superintendent of experimental gardens. That's his official title. So I think it's a pretty cool title to have. And that's where he is when the Battle of Gettysburg is fought. And that's where he is. It's where he's serving in the aftermath of the battle as the individual you see up on the screen, David Wills, and the rest of the Gettysburg community is struggling to figure out how do they pick up the pieces from that enormous battle, that enormous moment of human death and loss and carnage. And one of the biggest issues facing the Gettysburg community, and one that David Wills is going to be really involved in, is the creation of somewhere on the Gettysburg battlefield of a centralized cemetery, a centralized burial ground for these men that died in defense of Pennsylvania and the United States to be buried with decency, with honor, with respect. And of course, if you wanted something like that, it had never really been done before. National cemeteries, the way we think of national cemeteries today, like Arlington, those didn't exist yet. And so what Wills wanted was something that was rather original. It had never really been done before. And so as the bodies are being exhumed, as the wounded are still in the hospitals being treated, Wills would write to the Department of War about this task. And then they would then reach out to the Department of Agriculture. And that experimental gardener, William Saunders, is going to be the individual that is chosen to help create what this new national cemetery is going to look like. And Saunders was well equipped for this task. He had been involved in the creation of cemeteries previous to this. He's part of what is often referred to as the rural cemetery movement, where you take a cemetery and think of something like a colonial cemetery by a church where their stones are just kind of packed in there. And then rather than go that route, create something more like a park, more like an English garden where art and remembrance and the landscape come together in harmony. Saunders, for example, had worked on cemeteries like this in Massachusetts, in Chicago. He's going to help design Oak Ridge Cemetery, where Abraham Lincoln will ultimately be buried. So he's dealt with cemeteries before, and it's going to be William Saunders who meets with Wills on the Gettysburg battlefield as early as August 14th that developed the plan for what becomes the Soldiers' National Cemetery. The individual state plots sweeping in a semicircle across the hillside there on Cemetery Hill. Saunders believed in a thing he called simple grandeur. And that's what he wanted that cemetery, when you walked into it, to evoke. And he also wanted the cemetery to reflect the ideas and the ideals of the men buried in it. So no one individual has a better stone or marker than anyone else. No one state is elevated in importance over anyone else or any other state. So the cemetery is a reflection of that idea of union and equality that the men buried in it died for, ultimately. Saunders would actually show his design to Abraham Lincoln. He meets with Lincoln on November 17th, 1863, in the White House, shows Lincoln the plans for the cemetery that Lincoln is going to help consecrate. There's very good evidence that Saunders is on the train that brings Lincoln to Gettysburg on November 18th. Lincoln, of course, will stay in the David Wills house. There were as many as 20,000 other people in the community that evening there to see the ceremony of the following day. There was a reporter from a Washington, D.C. newspaper that recorded seeing William Saunders, the celebrated gardener and horticulturist, asleep in a chair because there were simply no other beds left available in the community. And then Saunders himself is going to be there on the platform only a few feet from Abraham Lincoln when Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address. And so he ultimately would acquire a copy of that National Cemetery book that I showed you at the beginning. And there on the bottom, and you can see it afterwards when you come up and take a look, he inscribed the fact that he was there on the platform only a few feet from Mr. Lincoln when Lincoln gave what we now know as the Gettysburg Address. So clearly that was an incredibly important project for Saunders to have worked on. He never got paid. He did it entirely for free. But I think Saunders also recognized the momentous nature of the Gettysburg Address and wanted to record for anyone who happened to see that book that he indeed had been there that afternoon on November 19th. Again, the cane also belongs to William Saunders. He would get that from a resident of Baltimore, Maryland, sometime between 1863 and 1865. We don't know that he had it at Gettysburg, but it is inscribed with his name, so certainly a link to the man himself. Now, the only other reason that you may be familiar with William Saunders is if you've ever had a navel orange. Have you ever had a navel orange? If you have, you can thank William Saunders. And Dan Welch will tell you, I spent way too much time researching this. William Saunders, when he's working for the Department of Agriculture in 1869, gets a report that in Brazil, there's this really great orange. Doesn't have any seeds. The skin is really easy to peel, travels really well. And Saunders, as an experimental gardener, thinks, that'd be great. I should check that out. So ultimately, he has a couple of plants shipped to the United States. They survive. And he takes two of them and sends them out to California with this woman that he knows that is moving there. And because of the climate in California, these orange plants, they do really, really well. And they kind of flourish in the California environment. So today, in the California agricultural economy, 43% of all citrus grown is the Saunders navel orange. And chances are, again, if you're having an orange and you're eating it, I'm not talking about orange juice, but if you're having an orange and you're eating it, that orange is ultimately descended from those two plants that Saunders sent out to California in 1869. So you can remember Saunders as a landscape architect and horticulturist, as the designer of the National Cemetery, or as the innovator of oranges that you may eat today. So one small example of his achievements. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Ranger Andrew Regiec, who will take over the next objects.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name's Andrew. I'm one of the rangers here. I'm an education technician, so I'm always thankful when they let me out of the basement to come up here and present to you all. It's going to be hard to follow up that slideshow, Chris. That was really good. So what I'm going to be talking about is something a little bit more kind of lesser known as far as the Gettysburg campaign goes. And as far as, well, I was chatting with one of our volunteers this morning who didn't really know too much about it. So I chose to talk about June 26, 1863, kind of the first shots of the Battle of Gettysburg, the skirmish at Marsh Creek, and the ransom of Gettysburg that happened on that day. A lot of folks don't even really know that the Confederates were in Gettysburg prior to July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, but I guarantee you they were. They actually moved through on June 26th. So to put that in a little bit of perspective here, Lee's Army of Northern Virginia is moving north in late June of 1863, and Pennsylvania is preparing. They're not sitting there wondering what's going to happen. They want to get their people together. They want to prepare an appropriate defense to try to hold off this invading army that is coming into this United States territory here. So the people of Pennsylvania aren't sitting idle. There is Governor Curtin of Pennsylvania. He is basically calling out the militia, if you will. They form into these what are called emergency militia units. These are officially formed by the state of Pennsylvania. They are volunteer units, And one of those units that's formed is called the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia. And Company A of that unit is from Gettysburg. The men that are in this unit are students from Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College. They're seminarians from the Lutheran Seminary. They're young men that are out for an adventure from the community of Gettysburg. They are just veterans that have come back. They've served their time already in the military, and they're ready to step up and defend their homes. They're going to move up to Harrisburg. They're going to be formed into this 26th Pennsylvania Emergency. The men from this unit are from all around Pennsylvania, everywhere from Phoenixville all the way up toward north of Harrisburg, all the way, well, not all the way, but just over in Hanover, not too far away from us here. So these men are called out and they're called into service. They go to Harrisburg, and in late June, as the Confederate Army is moving into south central Pennsylvania, they are sent to Gettysburg at the request of a guy by the name of Granville Haller, who's in charge of Gettysburg's defense in late June and early July of 1863. Haller's going to call this unit down to help him out. He has other militiamen that are under him. Chris didn't mention David McConaughey, but having to do with the cemetery. He's a local militia leader from the town of Gettysburg. There's Bell's Militia Cavalry from the town of Gettysburg. These are local men that have formed into these units where some sort of identification, go out there with a gun and try to defend your community. So Haller's going to call upon them, and he's going to call the 26th in the service, and he's going to bring them down here to Gettysburg. The same time this is going on in late June, General Jubal Early with his Confederate force is moving into south central Pennsylvania, coming up, basically, if you're familiar with the area, through Mount Alto, over by Caledonia State Park, where that now is. They'll be moving up that road up to where modern-day Route 30 is, the Lincoln Highway, the Chambersburg Pike. And on the morning of June 26th, Colonel William Jennings, pictured right there, he is going to be moving his unit into the town of Gettysburg. They arrive on the morning of June 26th, and they're sent out in the pouring rain out to the western side of the town, way out by Marsh Creek. If you're familiar with, basically it's where Seven Stars is. It's a little west of the Whistler House, the first shot house here on the Gettysburg battlefield. They're told to set up camp. And the Confederate forces will be coming in from the west. They'll be moving down the Chambersburg Road. And so these Confederate forces, they start their morning by Caledonia State Park, and they're marching all the way down toward the town of Gettysburg. Jubal Early gets reports that his force, that there's a United States force in front of him. So what he's going to do is he's going to split his men. He's going to send one force on 30 toward Gettysburg, and he's going to send another force to the north along what's called Hilltown Road. They break off pretty much where Cashtown is today. And they start to begin to head toward the town. This is while the 26th is setting up their defense, setting up their camp out by Marsh Creek. Bell's Militia Cavalry will be out to the west of Gettysburg. They're scouting. You can see them on the map there, coming back in. And as these men are falling back, they have made contact with the 35th Virginia Cavalry. The 35th Virginia pursues them back toward the town of Gettysburg. Bell's Militia Cavalry basically runs right through where the 26th is setting up their line. And Colonel Jennings, who is up here at the Whistler farm, looking down out over the valley, says, well, that must be our scouts coming back. And as scouts ride past him, he's like, the scouts are yelling, well, here come the Confederates. Jennings, looking out over the horizon, knows that his regiment, about 750 green soldiers who'd only been mustered into the military for 3 or 4 days at that point, absolutely no training, except for the very, very basics, some of them never having fired their weapon. They're not going to be able to stand an attack from an experienced Confederate force. So he's going to order them to fall back from their position back to the north, back trying to get toward Harrisburg. Unfortunately, he leaves his skirmish line out here, and for the most of them, this is going to be a point when they get captured and be taken into the town of Gettysburg. The 26th will make a stand at a place called the Whitmer Farm, which is, if they follow this road up, this is Belmont Road today where they go up. They go across on what's called Goldenville Road. And if you're familiar with Adams County, about a mile or two west of the ASPCA is where they're going to make their stand at a place called the Whitmer Farm. where there will be a skirmish again with the 26th Pennsylvania. The reason I bring this up, I think it's pretty interesting, this kind of intro to the Battle of Gettysburg. A lot of people wonder why the Confederates on July 1st thought, oh, it's just militia. It's because there was a precedent for that. It had already happened on June 26th. And so up here up front, and you can check it out a little bit more after the program, we have the flagstaff, the flagpole of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia. This flagstaff was carried by Mr. William Rupp of Company A from Gettysburg. If you're familiar with the Rupp House that's on Baltimore Street, this is that gentleman's brother. So he was a tanner here in town, worked at that business. He carried this flagpole through the Gettysburg campaign in June and mid-July, up to mid-July of 1863. As the Confederate forces rout the 26th Pennsylvania, when they meet at the Whitmer Farm, they're meeting that northern force of Jubal Early. Jubal Early's 35th Virginia and some Georgians are going to continue into the town of Gettysburg, and they're going to ransom the town. The 26th had a reserve that was in the town of Gettysburg. They get out of Dodge as quick as they can. And then the Confederates ride in, and you can see what the Pennsylvania College professor Michael Jacobs had to say about that. He said, "They rode into Gettysburg yelling and shouting, firing their pistols, not caring whether they killed or maimed man, woman, or child." And Jubal Early then would make demands of the town. "I need this supplies for my men." And we have that note here, also laying up here on the table. Jubal Early is going to write out what he demands from the people of the town of Gettysburg. And I have it here with me all nice and written out. He says, "We demand from the town this: 60 barrels of flour, 7,000 pounds of bacon, 1,200 pounds of sugar, 600 pounds of coffee, 1,000 pounds of salt, 100 bushel of onions, 1,000 pairs of shoes, and 500 hats." Basically, has this written out for him, probably by a subordinate officer. And this is given to a gentleman by the name of Kendall Hart, who is the Borough Council president of Gettysburg at the time. Now, Kendall Hart is going to take this note. He's going to take it to the Borough Council, and this is his response, also up here on the table. His original response, as he writes, he says, "Dear General Early, sir, the authorities of the Borough of Gettysburg, in answer to the demands made by you upon the said borough and county, say that their authority extends but to the borough, that the requisitions asked for cannot be given because it is utterly impossible to so comply. The quantities required are far beyond that in our possession. In compliance, however, to the demands, we will request that the stores be opened to you, and that the citizens furnish whatever they can of such provisions as may be asked. Further, we cannot promise. By authority of the Council of the Borough of Gettysburg, I hereunto, as president of said board, attach my name, David Kendall Hart." So this is the Confederates coming in, asking for supplies, and being granted, not the supplies necessarily that they ask for, but being granted open storefronts to go in and do what they need to do to forage for these supplies, to grab these supplies. And this is the actual note from the Borough Council that goes back to Early to do so. There's one more item I have up here. It's this Confederate note laying on the table. This is pretty interesting because General Early wanted to pay for some of the supplies that he was taking, and this actually comes from a druggist, Mr. Bueller, out of Gettysburg. And this note comes from him. Said he was paid for goods provided to the Confederate Army with this note. Was it really worth anything in the North? Probably not. But with that, that'll end me, and I'd like to turn it over to Mike Kwolek, one of our curators.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. I'd also thank Chris for letting me come out of the basement too as well for this nice blistery winter day as well. I'm going to ask Miss White to come up right now and do the grand review for me. Reveal.
That's a pun on Vanna White, in case you missed it right here.
Thank you, Matt. Get in.
Thank you.
Ready? We'll thank Miss White for her services. So, what you're staring at is General Meade's headquarters flag from 1864. So, on May 2nd, 1864, General Meade's going to put a circular out designating this as his new headquarters flag as we're going into the overland campaign. And of course, he then designates exactly details what this flag looks like. It's magenta colored, the swallow-tailed flag with an eagle of gold surrounded by a silver wreath for an emblem. Now, what else will happen in 1864? Who's going to be joining Meade? Any guesses? Yes, Grant. Grant's going to be joining Meade. So we're going to have a little bit of interpersonal relationship issues going on. So, at some point in May, General Grant's going to see this flag, and he's going to utter to General Meade saying, "What's this? Is Imperial Caesar anywhere about here?" Of course, because the flag is a deep purple in color, so it has all those royal connotations. So, of course, giving Meade a little jab there about his personal preference of the color of the flag he chose. Soon after that, by May 25th, he's going then to reverse course, and he's going to then go back to using just a small American-sized flag to designate his headquarters. If you look here, though, is this laser pointer? Whoop, laser pointer. If you look at the top here, this guy here, maybe he's holding the said flag that's right before you as well. So maybe that's when Grant saw it and had those famous comments about it. But who knows? I'm just pontificating. So, but it's going to go back in hiding for a little bit, but in 1865, Meade is going to strike back. It's going to come back out after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. If you look at this bottom portion there of the flag, and also you can see it on the actual artifact there, there's a nice border that goes all the way around the flag. Upon examination, we're finding little pieces of black silk on that border. So what we're thinking, and probably proven right, is that it's actually the black crepe that was put on the flag for Lincoln's assassination, since all the flags were ordered to be put into mourning afterwards. And then he's also going to use it during the Grand Review. So, of course, during the Grand Review, Meade's going to be at the head of the column of the Army of Potomac. And then you're going to have on the stage, who's on the stage? Grant. Grant's on the stage, Johnson's on the stage, and all their dignitaries. And then, of course, Meade's going to be riding past the stage with the flag in tow. And if you look here from this Harper's Weekly illustration, there is that flag right behind him. So, giving a little back there to General Grant. Then after that, he'll then get off his horse and he joins Grant there on the review stage as well to watch the rest of the procession. So, how do we acquire this flag? So this is going to go back to the Meade's family, and it stays with the Meade family until 1937, when it's donated to them what was called the Ward Library Museum in Philadelphia. Anyone know what that is? Familiar with the old Pine Street Museum down there? So this museum was chartered in 1888 by former President Rutherford B. Hayes, and who's basically at the time, he's the commander-in-chief for an organization called Mullis. Anyone familiar with Mullis? All right. Which stands for the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States. I know it's a mouthful. But he's then going to have a Gettysburg not native, but he's going to have a Gettysburg veteran run that museum, who's also pretty famous for this battle, John Page Nicholson. I'm sure we're all familiar with, who was the original park commissioner for the Gettysburg Park. He's going to be the first president for the War Library Museum, and then that museum's going to be in Philadelphia, but by 2016, that collection will then transfer to the ownership of the Gettysburg Foundation. And we're going to acquire then all the three-dimensional pieces from that collection. All the two-dimensional pieces are still within the Civil War Museum of Philadelphia's collection, but it's on a long-term repository agreement with the Union League in Philly. So you can always go down there to do research too. So as far as putting this on to exhibit, this is kind of a journey of this piece from storage then to exhibition. So we have the museum here chunked out into 3 different sections. In each section, we're rotating cyclically every single year. So for those of you who haven't been in the museum in a little bit, I do challenge you to go in there. We just got done doing the gallery space concerning the Battle of Gettysburg itself. So this planning goes all the way back to 2004, when we're starting to plan out what's going to go into the galleries concerning the care of the wounded and the dead, 1864 through 5, and of course then the creation of the park here. So we're going to say, well, here's Meade's headquarters flag. This is going to work great then for talking about the return home and the Grand Review. But what do we have to do to this flag to get it on exhibit? So as you can see here, this is what the flag was originally adhered to. It's a giant board, and it's covered in copalite. Are there any dentists in the house? Anyone just get dentistry work done? No? So copalite is dental adhesive. And what the conservators down at Harper's Ferry Center were able to find by using, here's a mouthful for you too, it's called FTIR, which stands for Fourier Transfer Infrared Spectroscopy. So basically what they're doing is they're taking an infrared light and they're going to bounce that off of that adhesive, and it's going to compare that then to other known samples within a database. And then it comes back and it shows that it was pretty much copalite. So they smeared this board just with tons of dental adhesive. So of course that's not great for artifact conservation, right? And then the silk ties that you can see on the flag there that are turning in towards the eagle, those were originally stapled to the board. And then there's tons of paint flaking and loss from the eagle itself and the wreath around it. And the silk itself is splitting and shattering because of course silk is very delicate as well. So we're going to contract with the National Park Service lab down at Harper's Ferry Center. They are one of the only conservation labs in the whole entire United States that handles all the Park Service units. So these ladies and men down there, they have quite a bit of work to do to take care of the whole entire Park Service system. So what do they do while it's down there? So they're going to remove the flag from its old board. You can see them working on an old board below them there. And they'll be using basically ethanol vapor chambers and suction tables, which I'll show you an example of that in a moment here. Then all the creases on the flag, they're going to be localized, humidified to get them to lay flat, and then they'll press those out. And then you're going to get conservation grade mounting and material to them to basically make a buffer, then to put it into this pressure mount frame that you see before you. They're then going to overlay crapling over the face of the flag too, so there's no interaction between the actual paint and then the acrylic glazing that's going to go on top, so that way you're not going to have any paint that adhere to that and thus damage the flag even more so. But to show you just an example of how much work went into this, here is them using that suction table. And what you're going to see is them putting actually ethanol onto the flag. There's a suction table behind the flag there, and it's going to start sucking the ethanol through the flag itself, and it's going to start to break away the adhesive bonds of the copalite. And you'll see that this will start just basically fading away pretty quickly. But imagine doing this, and the whole entire flag is covered in copalite. So very painstaking, time-consuming processes to get this to where it is today. And to give you an example, or give you how many hours, it took 120 conservation hours to get this flag from where it was to what you see before you. Yeah, pretty remarkable though that you can actually just pull that off. But during the conservation, we got a pretty cool surprise for us down in museum services. So we had always suspected that this flag was made by Cisco & Brothers. We couldn't prove it though. So what happened when we were actually able to pull this flag off of that board, on the back end of the hoist, there you go. There's the manufacturer mark on the flag. It's Cisco Bros, Baltimore, Maryland. So our guesses were proven right, which is pretty cool. And Cisco & Brothers, they were formed in 1835. It was a wife and husband venture. And then by the time the Civil War starts, they're going to be very, let's see here, pragmatic in their business practices. They're going to be selling not only palmetto flags and secession cockades, but also American flags to whoever's really interested. So take your pick of which side you want to be on. They're going to sell you something for it. After that, then she's going to sell the business to her two sons, who will then go on to be Cisco & Brothers. But one of the coolest things about this flag conservation journey is that, anyone know who Adam Savage is? Do you guys remember Mythbusters? Yes, who said Mythbusters? Thank you, yes. Is that during the time it was at the conservation lab, Adam Savage from Mythbusters fame went down to the laboratories to check out all the different cool activities that the conservators do down there, and highlighting their very important work that they do within the National Park Service system, preserving our history day in and day out. So if you're interested in going even deeper into a nerdy dive onto this flag, I encourage you to go on to YouTube and check out Adam Savage's Tested YouTube series that features all the different conservators from Harpers Ferry Center and the different projects they're working on. It is very enlightening. But yeah, so pretty amazing flag from start to finish. And if you come back by the fall this year, this flag will be up on exhibition within our main galleries. And with that, I'll bring it up to Ranger Dan Welch.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I'd like to begin by thanking Chris for including me in today's program and having Mike speak before me. I mean, how do you top that, ladies and gentlemen? Especially when I'm going to be speaking about a flag today as well, or shall I say a remnant of a flag about the size of a postage stamp. So very challenging to be in my position today to try to follow Meade's headquarters flag. But I want to start, before we get into the story of that, with a hypothetical scenario. For some reason, I have my personal copy of the midwinter lecture schedule here. And at some point during the program, I passed this midwinter lecture schedule around the audience. Just pass it down there. And for whatever reason, in this hypothetical situation, today happens to be the last midwinter lecture ever to occur here at Gettysburg National Military Park. And so now my personal copy of that schedule has taken on some sort of importance. And later in life, when I win the Pulitzer or the Nobel, before Matt Atkinson does, now this program has taken on even more historical significance. The personal copy of the last speaker, the last midwinter lecture program ever here at Gettysburg National Military Park. And future historians look at this program that's been saved, and they're able to attach even more historical importance to it, because not only is the historical importance rooted in the fact that it was my personal copy, a Nobel or Pulitzer Prize winner, but that all these other people in this hypothetical program had passed it along and had touched it. And now every one of those people who handled that program in this hypothetical story, their story becomes rooted in the history of that artifact as well. And that's the story we're going to hear today about the battle flag of the 24th Michigan, part of the famous Iron Brigade. Now, when the flag was presented to the regiment in Detroit in 1862, a solemn vow was taken never to allow it to trail before the enemy or fall into his hands. The person that took the flag of the 24th Michigan when the regiment was put into service that had that responsibility was this man pictured here, Abel Peck. Now, Abel Peck was a 42-year-old, twice-widowed farmer from Nankin, Michigan, when he enlisted with the regiment in its earliest days. And he volunteered to be the regiment's first color bearer. And because of that, he would receive a $100 cash bounty upon his enlistment that had been donated anonymously for volunteering to carry and protect that flag. The commanding officer of the 24th Michigan, we'll hear about a little later in my portion of the program, said that Peck was, quote, a man greatly admired for his almost saintly character. Now, on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, as the famous Iron Brigade is reaching the field and they're heading into combat on McPherson's Ridge, Sergeant Peck is carrying the colors, the national colors of the 24th Michigan into combat. And right as they are reaching the skirmishers of the 13th Alabama, shots ring out from the Confederate skirmish line, and a bullet pierces Abel Peck's head. He's killed instantly and collapses to the ground. Peck's remains would later be moved potentially as one of the soldiers buried in the National Cemetery. But as Peck is wounded and he's collapsing to the ground, another soldier in the 24th Michigan's color guard, a man by the name of Charles Bellor of Company E, springs forward and grabs the flag before it hits the ground completely. Unfortunately, we don't have an image of Bellor. But Bellor was originally from Canada, and he had enlisted when he was just 31 years of age, a longtime resident of Detroit. And he would carry the flag of the 24th Michigan throughout the rest of that charge that Abel Peck had led, and would continue to bear them throughout the morning engagement that the 24th Michigan was involved with. Now, later in the day on July 1st, the situation changed. As many of us know the story, the initial Confederate attacks will be repulsed, more Confederate reinforcements are brought up, and they will try again. As the 24th Michigan would fall back later that day, eastward across Willoughby Run to their second position, Charles Belloir would be killed. He'd be the second color bearer to be killed that day. The location of his remains were also not known after the battle, and he could be in one of the many unknown plots in the National Cemetery. Now, as soon as Belloir collapses to the ground, and with it the flag, a private by the name of Augustus Ernest would pick the colors up, and he would carry them to the next position that the 24th Michigan would take in this ongoing afternoon fight of July the 1st. We also do not have an image of Ernest. But it's while at this third position that the 24th Michigan is fighting at, Ernest, just an 18-year-old soldier from Brownstone, Michigan, was shot through the chest and fell to the ground dead. He would fall at the feet of First Sergeant Everard B. Welton. And Welton we do have an image of. So think about all these people who have touched these colors so far on July 1st. And how each one of their stories is adding to the historical legacy of this piece of cloth. Now, Everard B. Welton was originally from Connecticut, and he had risen through the ranks to first lieutenant by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, a young first lieutenant at just 22 years of age. Now, when Ernest, the previous guy that had the flag, fell dead, Welton reached forward and he picked up the flag and he would hold them until the commanding officer of the regiment, Colonel Henry Morrow, would make his way over to Welton and literally take the flag from Welton's hands. It is this act of the Colonel of the 24th taking that flag away from Welton that probably saved his life, because there were only a few in the entire color guard of the 24th Michigan that escaped this battle. Most were killed, a few were wounded. So Welton would survive this day by Colonel Morrow taking that flag from him. Welton would go on to have a distinguished Civil War service career. Not only would he survive the Battle of Gettysburg, he would survive 38 individual engagements that he participated in from 1862 to 1865. And from the fall of 1864 to the end of the war, he was detailed as one of General Samuel Crawford's aides and would remain on his staff through the rest of the war. So as I mentioned, the colonel of the 24th Michigan, Henry Morrow, has now grabbed the flag from Welton. Morrow, believe it or not, is actually a native of Warrenton, Virginia. He had enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 17. He served 1 year in the Mexican War. He would later move to Michigan after working in the U.S. Senate as a page. He'd study law, become a practicing attorney when the war broke out. So he's 33 years old, has a lot of experience, and signs up to fight in Lincoln's Army, joins the 24th, and becomes its commanding officer. So Colonel Morrow has now gone over to Welton. He's grabbed the flag, and he has the flag for several moments when he sees another member of the color company, Corporal Andrew Wagner. And he calls Wagner over, and he gives the flag to Wagner to look after. Now, while Morrow is exchanging the flag to Andrew Wagner, another member of the color guard was wounded. And this was a man by the name of Sergeant William J. Noggle. Historical records unclear at what point he was standing next to Morrow that he was wounded, but his wound would take him out of the fight. And he would survive that wound for several months. He would later die on November the 7th of blood poisoning in a hospital in Baltimore, Maryland at the age of 24. So the fight is continuing to progress. After Corporal Wagner receives the flag from Morrow, he waves it in the face of the enemy, and he advances to a new position. Morrow is slowly but surely pulling the 24th Michigan and the rest of the Iron Brigade rearward, eastward, towards Seminary Ridge. And Morrow has selected a new position. He has ordered Wagner to take that flag and plant it in the new position. So as Wagner heads over to the new position and he establishes the flag there, and the regiment is starting to form around him in low ground. This is low ground between McPherson's Ridge and Seminary Ridge. The 39-year-old Andrew Wagner was quickly shot through the breast, and he fell with the colors. Now, Wagner would also survive his wound, but he would be discharged in 1864 for disability. When Corporal Andrew Wagner fell, now the commanding officer of the 24th Michigan, Colonel Henry Morrow, picks up the flag for a second time that day. And as soon as Morrow gets the flag upright, this plucky, gallant young Irishman by the name of William Kelly walks over to Morrow. And you can imagine, bullets are flying, the cacophony of battle, the smoke is rolling through the field, cries of the wounded and dying are being raised. And at this same time, this young Irishman walks over to Morrow and he screams above the cacophony of the battle. He says, "The Colonel of the 24th Michigan shall not carry the colors while I am alive." It's the final words that Kelly ever utters. Within a moment, he is shot and killed immediately. When Kelly collapses to the ground, Private William Spaulding of the 24th will pick up the flag and carry it forward. Now, Spaulding had just returned to the regiment. He had been wounded at the end of April in a small skirmish at Fitzhugh's Crossing. He had suffered a wound to the arm. This is his first time back with the regiment, and he picks up the flag. As Spaulding grabs the flag off the young Irishman, Colonel Morrow comes over yet again. And miraculously, as Morrow is approaching him, both Morrow is going to survive the volley of fire that's coming in towards him, and Private Spaulding would as well. Spaulding would live to the age of 72 in 1916. And if you count Colonel Morrow, Private Spaulding is the 8th man to carry the regimental flag this day since the battle began on the morning of July 1st. So Morrow makes his way over to Spaulding. Morrow takes the flag for the 3rd time. And as Morrow begins to wave those colors once again to rally the decimated ranks of the 24th Michigan, a mini ball grazes Morrow's head, and he collapses to the ground holding the flag. Within a moment, Morrow is able to stagger to his feet, but he realizes he is unable to continue commanding the regiment, and he will head to the rear towards the town of Gettysburg, seeking care. One of the interesting things about his story, you heard from Chris's presentation, a little information about David Wills, one of the town's citizens that helped lead the creation of the Soldiers National Cemetery. Morrow would be treated in the Wills home following the battle during his recovery. Morrow would also survive this wound. He would go on to fight during the rest of the Civil War. He'd be wounded again at the Wilderness and Petersburg, and after the war, he would be commissioned as a lieutenant colonel and serve in various U.S. Army regular infantry units until his death in 1891. Now, as Morrow is wounded at the 3rd time now holding this flag, standing next to him is another member of the color company, and these are the guys that are responsible for the protection of the color bearer and the flag. A man by the name of Thomas Suget would also be wounded standing next to Morrow. Suget would die of his wounds on July the 28th and is buried in the Michigan plot identified in the Soldiers National Cemetery. Now, upon the collapse of Morrow, we're unsure of who takes the flag next. We don't know. The historical record is unclear. But after some time, a captain of the 24th Michigan by the name of Albert Edwards sees a wounded soldier or dying soldier, as he writes about it later, of the 24th Michigan grasping the colors on the ground. Edwards walks over, he pries it from the hands of this wounded or dying soldier of the 24th, and he begins to rally the regiment behind the barricade. If those of you have studied the July 1st fighting, the last stand really of these units that have been fighting west of town and McPherson's Ridge throughout the day have thrown up a number of rails and made a makeshift barricade in front of the Lutheran Theological Seminary. So Edwards finds this flag on the ground being held by a wounded or dying soldier of the 24th. He grabs it, he lifts those flags up above the barricade, and he begins waving them to rally the men. But the Confederate onslaught is too much, and eventually a retreat will be ordered. And Edwards will carry the flag all the way through the town of Gettysburg, all the way to Cemetery Hill, where he will write, he finds a battery in the cemetery that he will rest the flag upon. He will go find a headstone that he will sit on to rest, while the rest of the men of the 24th rally around those colors. Edwards was one of only few that day that touched the flag and survived the battle, not passing away until 1909. Now, as Edwards is leading the 24th Michigan, carrying, this is the de facto commander now of the 24th Michigan, a captain. He's leading the retreat through the town of Gettysburg with the colors. Following him is another member of the color company, the color guard, Thomas Ballou. At some point during the retreat, Ballou would receive a gunshot wound of the groin, and he would be taken to the John Cannon House on the corner of Baltimore Street and East Middle Street, where he'll initially receive care. That wound is going to linger for many months. He'll eventually make his way to Camp Letterman. He'll be shipped off from Letterman to a general hospital in Harrisburg, and then in Harrisburg, on November the 26th, he'll pass away from what is listed as traumatic tetanus. One more soldier I wanted to profile today that came in contact with these colors was Corporal William Ziegler. He was another member of the color guard who would be killed on July 1st, 1863. We don't know exactly at what moment he had the colors and at what moment he was killed, but we do know that he did participate in this action. He did come in contact with the colors, and he was killed doing his duty as a member of the color guard. His younger brother, who was also in the regiment, was wounded during the fighting of July 1st. And following the fighting, he went out as a wounded soldier the days after the battle looking for his brother, and he was unable to find his brother's remains. And it's more than likely that William Ziegler, a 23-year-old tinsmith before the war, rests among the unknowns in the Soldiers' National Cemetery today. So I'd like to close my portion of the program by sharing with you what a veteran of the 24th Michigan who wrote the regimental history wrote about the flag of the 24th here at Gettysburg. He said, "The conduct of the 24th Michigan in this first day's battle, from colonel to private, was a series of the most heroic and brilliant acts of supporting and rallying on the flag, amid a shower of leaden hail ever known in the annals of war, and conferred immortal honor upon that Spartan band as the lasting as the blue sky that looks down upon that field of carnage and glory. Few instances of such devotion to that flag can be found in the history of any war. During this first day's fight, the flag of the 24th Michigan was borne by no less than 10 different persons, 5 of whom were killed and 2 were wounded. 9 color bearers and guards of the 24th Michigan lost their lives or received mortal wounds in defense of its flag this first day of the great battle, a bloody but most glorious record." Pictured before you on the left-hand side of the screen is the national colors of the 24th Michigan that were carried into combat here at Gettysburg on July 1st, the colors that we heard about in our story today. This flag is currently in the state capitol in Michigan as part of their Civil War flag collection. They have many, many flags of many of the Michigan regiments that served not only during the Civil War, but also the Spanish-American War. So that's the picture that is up in Michigan today, and I want to thank the flag conservator and curator up there, Matt Van Ecker, who provided me with some of the research for this program. The portion of a flag that we have is on the table and is pictured there on the right-hand side of the screen, and obviously you can see it's nothing like Mike Kwolek's flag. This flag is part of a collection of objects known as the Civil War Museum of Philadelphia that Mike talked about a little bit earlier in his program. Now, it is likely that this flag portion that we have in our collection is actually part of the regiment's state colors, which they also have in Michigan. Both Mike and the conservator up in Detroit were doing some research and looking into particularly the fringe at the bottom of both, and we're noticing that whatever conservators notice, the difference in their manufacture and style and type of tying and sewing. But either way, we heard an amazing story today of all of these flag bearers of the 24th Michigan and how each one of them, when they grabbed the flag that day, their story, their experiences that led them to that moment have led us today to this very storied history of this small piece of fabric that you can see before you at the end of the program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Matt Atkinson.
Well, I don't know how I beat this. So I learned a lot through the previous four speakers. I didn't know, for example, any of that history of that 26th emergency militia fight. I found that fascinating. He said, I've never heard that story about the 24th Michigan either. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to take us, every speaker is pretty much tied into Gettysburg somehow. And I'm going to take a direct left as usual and take you somewhere completely different. But to somebody that you should know. And hopefully, if you're very lucky, his picture is in your back pocket right now. And that is none other than U.S. Grant. Now, Grant really needs no introduction. He's a professional military officer before the war. He resigns because he gets on the West Coast. He's separated from his wife, who he loved very dearly, and he's very lonely. He's cashiered, basically, or forced to resign because of his drinking. He comes back from the Army. He can't in the 1850s, and he can't find his way. Everything he does fails. Hard scrabble. The farm, he tried farming, that failed. He ends up selling firewood, y'all, on the street corner in St. Louis, trying to make ends meet. He pawns his gold watch to buy Christmas presents for his family one year. I mean, it's just hard luck, one after another. And if anything could get any worse for him, he has to go back to his father. And he has to ask his daddy for a job in the tannery business back in Ohio. And that's where Grant is when the war breaks out. He gets a colonel's position in Illinois to begin with, and he gets very lucky because he has a politician backing him throughout the war. Elihu Washburn, if I'm saying that correctly. But Grant his luck turns around. And the story I'm telling you right now, I hope, even if it doesn't mirror your own life, it will give you something to base what you can do if you put your mind to it. There's something for every American to connect with the Ulysses S. Grant story. So Grant rises up through the ranks. He's a very taciturn man. He's a very quiet man, but he's a very solid man. When the war breaks out, he eventually makes brigadier general. He ends up, I'm going to fast forward through a lot of things here, but he ends up commanding the U.S. Army at Fort Donelson in the middle of Tennessee, which was trying to open up the Cumberland River. The Confederates come out. They roll up his complete right flank. He almost loses the battle, but he comes back to lick them again the next day. He goes on to win the battle, captures almost the entire garrison of Fort Donelson. He ends up capturing Nashville. He takes his army south to a little place called Shiloh Landing. And I hear the moan. And on April 6th of 1862, he's surprised again. The Confederates come out and they almost run his entire army into the Tennessee River. Grant's sitting there in the pouring downpour, rain just dripping all over him. He evacuated his headquarters because there was a hospital in there, and this man who would order thousands of men to their death could not stand the sight of blood. He's sitting under a tree in the driving rain, and Sherman comes up to him, his trusted confidant, and he says to him, "Looks like a hard day for you." And Grant looks at him and says, "Yes, but we'll look him tomorrow." And he gets up and he does that. What is that story, ladies and gentlemen? That's getting back up when somebody knocks you down. He's almost cashiered after Shiloh. People say he's drunk again. General Halleck, I'm doing a little deep dive right here, relieves him of command over some tic-tac stuff, paperwork, and Grant is thinking about resigning from the Army, but he doesn't do that. Halleck is called back. This is how things can roll. You not only make things happen in your life, you also have to have some luck involved in there. And Halleck is called back to Washington, which therefore catapults Grant back into the commander's seat. And Grant ends up going on to capture Corinth, and he ends up capturing Vicksburg, Mississippi, after many failed attempts. Lincoln was on the verge of sacking U.S. Grant at the same time that the Gettysburg campaign was on. And with his back against the wall, Grant goes forward, and he fights after, as I said, many failed attempts. He crosses the Mississippi, severs his supply line, fights 5 battles in 3 weeks, and ends up besieging the city of Vicksburg for 47 days, ending up capturing another Confederate army. And that with Gettysburg, coupled with Gettysburg, as we know now, is the turning point of the war. But Grant's not finished. There's a complete another Union army separate from him, the Army of the Cumberland, who gets licked by some of the same units that fight here at Gettysburg at a place called Chickamauga outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that Union army is pushed back into the city itself, and who do they summon to come bail out that Union army? They send Grant. And Grant gets up there, and he ends up, battle he didn't even mean to win that quickly. He ends up winning Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain. And that brings us to our point today. That's where Grant is when 1864 rolls about. The Battle of around Chattanooga is around November, and by March of '64, Congress has revived the rank of Lieutenant General just for U.S. Grant, because they need a new rank, you know. And so that brings us to the story of this pen that we have right here. Grant is summoned at that time. He was in Nashville, Tennessee. He is summoned to Washington. And when he arrives in Washington, he has never been there since the beginning of the war, as far as I can tell. And this commander-in-chief, Abraham Lincoln, has never set eyes upon the commander that he has entrusted for so long, and he has held off the naysayers for so long. So we bring the narrative to March 8th of 1864. Grant arrives in Washington. And where else are you going to stand in Washington or stay in Washington, D.C., but the Willard Hotel? I have always wanted to go get a drink in the Willard Hotel, but never have. Well, he comes in. Here's this scruffy-looking Union general. I mean, there are a dime a dozen in Washington, D.C. in 1864. I mean, pick one. Nobody knows who he is. And he's got this little kid in tow with him, this 12-year-old son with him. And he walks up to the desk, and he asks for a room at the Willard Hotel. And the clerk is like, well, as Lincoln's secretary said, the Willard Hotel was, quote, miraculous in meanness and contemptible in cuisine. Grant and his son Fred didn't stand out, and at the front desk, the hotel clerk told the pair that there was a small room available for them at the top of the hotel. Grant didn't say anything. He said that'd be fine. And the clerk handed him the register, and Grant signed his name, U.S. Grant and Son, Galena, Illinois. When the clerk turned the book back around and saw who had signed that said book, there was suddenly a suite available for Grant. That night was when Grant arrived on March 8th, Lincoln held a weekly reception at the White House. And it happened to be that evening. So Grant arrives at the White House at 9:30 p.m. He is still dressed in the same uniform, scruffy uniform, which he arrived in town. Why is he not changed into his dress uniform? He had misplaced the key to his trunk. And so he wore the same shabby clothes for this engagement. Lincoln was waiting on him, and he had prepared to meet Grant, or to identify Grant would be a better word, because there was a painting hanging in the Capitol by a John Antrobus. If you want to look that up on your phone, that you can see a picture of that painting. And Lincoln had studied the painting and memorized Grant's features. And now the two men finally met. Grant's aide, Horace Porter, recalled the moment. Quote, with a face radiant with delight, Lincoln advanced rapidly 2 or 3 steps toward his distinguished visitor and cried out, "Why, here is General Grant. Well, this is a great pleasure, I assure you." At the same time seizing him by the hand and shaking it for several minutes with a vigor which showed the extreme cordiality of the welcome. Grant, the stoic, quiet man, and Lincoln, the loquacious. Porter noted the difference in physicality. Quote, Grant's right hand grasped the lapel of his coat. His head was bent slightly forward, and his eyes upturned toward Lincoln's face. The president, 8 inches taller than Grant, looked down with beaming countenance upon his guest. A few minutes later, Grant entered the East Room. And I know this probably wouldn't be on the White House tour if I went in there, but if I ever got in the East Room, I've always wanted to I just wanted to get in the East Room just to see it, one time. Applause and cheers broke out when Grant entered the room. And Grant is like, 5'6", 5'7", something like that. And they can't see him. And the crowd is chanting, Grant, 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 Grant. And they won't stop cheering. Grant doesn't want anything to do with this. I mean, he's a very quiet, humble man, as I've already described. And so what does Grant do? He climbs up on a couch in the White House, in the East Room, so the crowd can see him. And, after a few minutes, he leaves, and probably in a very big hurry. Now let's get to the story here. The next day, Grant returned to the White House for the official promotion ceremony, and Lincoln read the following from a piece of paper. Quote, with this high honor devolves upon you also a corresponding responsibility. As the country herein trusts you, so under God it will sustain you. I scarcely need to add that with what I here speak for the nation goes my own hearty personal concurrence. And with that, Lincoln turned to Grant for his remarks. Now, the night before Grant left that reception, Lincoln had told him or given him a copy of what he was going to say the next day. And he suggested to Grant that he say a few brief remarks about morale and patriotism and so forth. Lincoln asked Grant when he could be ready before he left, and Grant looked at him, and I'm sure Lincoln was astonished, and he says, I can have my speech prepared in 30 minutes, which was just like Grant. He was ready to go. Grant was visibly nervous that day at the commissioning. Fishing for the speech in his pocket, he fumbled nervously while trying to decipher his own handwriting. Then he straightened his back, took a breath, and began to read. His brief statement was to the man himself. Quote, with the aid of the noble armies that have fought on so many fields for our common country, it will be my earnest endeavor not to disappoint your expectations. I feel the full width of the responsibilities now devolving on me, and know that if they are met, it will be due to those armies, and above all to the favor of that providence which leads both nations and men. And with that, that's all Grant had to say. Lincoln in his brevity and Grant in his brevity. So, to go back to the original point of all this, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, we have the gold and ivory pen, which you can see is up here. Not a pen, but the pen. used by Lincoln himself. I just geek out on stuff. Y'all just going to have to, you don't have to, I just geek out on this stuff. But this is the very pen that Abraham, y'all like that Southern accent, there's a pen and a pen, all right? They're both interchangeable. This is the very pen that Abraham Lincoln held in his hand when he signed the commission for promoting Grant to lieutenant general, which had not been held since George Washington. So when you get up here, you can take a good look at it. I asked to write something with it, but I was denied by that. In addition to that, we have the Lieutenant General shoulder boards. And if Mike Kwolek, the curator, is in a good mood after this program is over, he will hold it up for you, because I didn't know this until a couple minutes ago, before the program began. There is actually a handwritten note by Grant's wife, Julia Grant, on the reverse side of these shoulder boards that says that these shoulder boards were worn around the fields of Petersburg and obviously in the Appomattox campaign right there. That's pretty cool that we have here, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. So I don't know if I topped anybody or underwhelmed anybody, but I thought, Grant, who can you do better than U.S. Grant? Now let me say one thing in finality. Chris, my boss, opened up the program talking about Tom Holbrook and the origins of this program right here. A lot of your common questions to me, and I might as well answer this online. There's a common question posed to me as to how we choose the programs. I mean, they ask me, are you assigned this? Are you told to do this? And my standard answer is no, I'm given a parameter of it. And so my parameter was an artifact for this particular program. And I asked Mike, what do we have on Vicksburg? If you go back to the origins of this program, Chris Gwinn has given us a lot of leeway over the years. Some might argue too much leeway, but that freedom has allowed us to choose these topics. Now going to Tom Holbrook and the origins of this particular program right here, Tom Holbrook for many decades was the black powder supervisor for this park. And because of that, Tom he's tied up every weekend, and I mean every weekend. He would go from April to October with black powder every weekend. And so Tom didn't do field programs a lot, maybe one or two on the weekdays, but he really wasn't doing a lot. He had enough work to do on his own. And so, Tom was not in the office except to check his email. What I'm driving at, ladies and gentlemen, the origins of this program is because Tom Holbrook couldn't put together a PowerPoint. And so what did he do? He adapted and he overcame. And because of Chris was so gracious, he went to Greg Goodell, Mike Kwolek, and he says, can I use some artifacts? And instead of using a picture, he brought out the actual artifact for y'all to see. And that is what we're continuing to do today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Tom has had some serious health issues. For some reason, we Rangers don't retire easily from Gettysburg. I don't know. We have a run of bad luck, but he's had some serious health issues, and we wish him the best. But beyond everything, we as a staff want to thank Tom Holbrook for all the many years of dedication, and for especially this program which we would like to dedicate to him today. Thank you all very much.